More than 700 former pupils of a British Forces school have met up in Newbury for one of the biggest ever school reunions. Kathy Alexander was there.
Hundreds of long-lost school friends. Some hadn't seen each other for 40 years. The sons and daughters of British service personnel, they'd been educated at Prince Rupert School on the North Sea coast of Germany.
It's just 35 years since we've seen each other, and we all three of us shared a dorm together. And the funny thing is, we keep seeing each other as we were children.
It was a mammoth task tracing the thousands of old pupils, which started with a single advert and snowballed into a major event.
They just freak out, basically, when they hear, particularly if they get a letter from us that is unsolicited, and they have an envelope coming through that's just got the school crest on it and says, we're pleased to have found you. And they go, oh my God!
And while there may never again be quite such an impressive reunion, many of the old friends may well have found a lasting reacquaintance. Kathy Alexander in Newbury for Meridian News.
Ray and Daphne Dyer, you're both members of the teaching staff from Prince Rupert School. Does it surprise you that the school was so popular and people want to come back in such vast numbers to this reunion?
Well, it does surprise me particularly. I think the particular thing that surprised me, what we mustn't forget, is that it's been organised by an ex-pupil, not a member of staff. They didn't seem to want to reorganise the school or bring it back in memory, but an ex-pupil wanted to do that. So I've suddenly realised that it was actually much more important to the pupils than it was to us. But it's pupils who needed the reunion, not us really, I think, because it's their school and it's their heritage and it's their background, and service children need that to hang on to.
Did they show this enthusiasm for the school while they were there? I mean, did you get the impression that they'd be dying to get back and reunite in a few years' time?
I think the most interesting thing that's been said to me today is that I'm trying to be terribly liberal and modern now, and I say, well, it was a very repressive regime, wasn't it? You were tied down, the sort of things you couldn't do. We were very finicky about whether you could kiss your girlfriend after the cinema show or even hold her hand, it's really quite ridiculous, some of the rules we were actually expected to implement. But they said, no, that was fine, because it gave us an enormous amount of creative energy to get round these rules. We had the fun actually managing to defeat the rules as you laid them down. And I can actually quite understand that. It gave them a sense of, I think someone said earlier, camaraderie. They were all in it together. They all had to beat the system. And they did it as ingeniously and imaginatively as they possibly could. And I think that's marvellous. At the time I probably didn't, but now I think it's absolutely amazing.
Daphne, can I ask you, it's very unusual to have a co-educational boarding school. Did you find that the girls fitted in this sort of what was a fairly unusual education system?
Yes, I think they did completely, because I'm in favour of co-ed education. I'm very much against single-sex schools. And I think as far as I was concerned, being in charge of girls' PE, I think it was marvellous, the wide range of facilities that we were able to offer them, where they could compete with boys on equal terms in many of the sports. For example, the sailing and the canoeing and swimming, many sports where they were able to compete together, and also joint activities, which I think is very healthy for leisure activities.
So they fitted in pretty well?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Just as well as the boys?
Absolutely.
And what are the things that you remember best about the school?
This was quite a unique organisation. It was a boarding school, comprehensive school, mixed, and with very, very good facilities. Now, I don't think any school in England has got the sort of facilities we had there, not even the best grant-maintained school in the country.
Do you remember the pupils as being very well behaved, or were they always trying
They were all pussycats, really. They were all endearingly charming and wonderfully. Never had any problems. We didn't really, but I think that was because they were so clever and so subversive. They could actually get away with a lot of things by being charming.
And you didn't even know what was happening, do you?
No, not a clue. Adults never do they? But on coming here has been, I think it's been as rewarding as anything I've ever done in my life, to have so many young middle-aged people, saying thank you. It's wonderful, you know.
I think the amazing thing is where it's flattering, where they still recognise us.
Yes, you haven't changed a bit.
Well, it's surprising how much, I suppose if you're 11 or 12, you change a lot between that and
Well, even
30, 40,
at
maybe,
15, 16, 17, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, they were young, sort of young pupils, and you know, at 15 and 16, and you used to look at their photographs that a lot of them were wearing, which was lovely, and you think, gosh, yes, I can remember you. Yeah.
And I used to bring a busload of them over every September to spend a week at Stretford. This was something else we could afford to do. I mean, they paid for it, they paid something towards it, but it was very heavily subsidised. I couldn't do it now in a school in England.
No.
But we came all the way from Wilhelmshaven. We picked up some kids from Ham School, the Ham Boys and Girls School. We brought a busload, and we had 2 buses usually that came across all the way over to Stratford, and we booked a farmhouse, and we lived in the farmhouse for a week. And I met someone today who said to me, you know, the only Shakespeare I ever learned and enjoyed was by going to see it on the stage in Stratford. He said, then I suddenly realised it was really about people, real people. It wasn't just an awful lot of poetry I didn't understand. And I think, you know, able to do that was unique. And I think it influenced a lot of people. It was a lot of difficult thing to organise and complicated, but nevertheless it made its mark. And
Well, thanks very much, Rain Duffy, for
that's all.
talking to us.
Thank you. Looking forward to Wilhelmshaven.
97.
The first pupil to arrive in the school in July 1947. And the basis of that was that I think we'd been told on the joining instruction to arrive between a particular time, say 2 and 5.
This was the opening of the school?
Absolutely,
Yeah.
the first 60.
Right.
Because it only opened for about 4 weeks in the summer term with 60 pupils.
Right.
And then reopened in the normal September with 200, 250, something like that. Anyway, a full complement.
Yeah.
The idea was to have a
Well, it wasn't
pilot,
a full complement,
wasn't it?
No.
But the idea was to have a pilot group just to debug.
So you were guinea pigs?
We were
in
guinea
effect.
pigs.
Right.
We were the sort of-
Absolutely.
Yeah.
In actual fact, the head said that if it hadn't have worked, they would not have opened it again.
Really?
With those-
So it's all your fault?
Well, I never heard that story. I wouldn't be surprised.
No,
Yeah.
it was.
It was
definitely-
very tentative.
Interesting, yes.
Anyhow, we arrived, and my father, being a man of enormous precision about everything he did and does, because he's still alive at 91, we arrived on the dot, drove into the school, drove about, couldn't find anyone. Eventually the head appeared and said, you are rather prompt sort of thing. You know, we'd arrived on the dot. I think you're the first to arrive. And then and so we unloaded our stuff at Drake House and that sort of thing. And then and he walked along with us, and I think we probably met John Duxbury or someone like that.
Yeah.
Anyway, and an arrival, he said, oh, by the way, someone else did arrive before you, and I don't know who, because they didn't stay because they arrived so early. I mean, someone had arrived exceptionally early, before the allotted time. And then he said, now, I can actually almost remember, he said, they've gone off into the town somewhere to see if they can get some lunch or fun. And that presumably was you.
It could have been. We came fairly early, and the first thing I remember is going to Drake House and seeing some great paw marks of Henry up the stairs.
Who's Henry?
Was the dog.
Oh, right.
A St. Bernard.
Oh,
God.
massive, yes.
Huge paws.
Yeah.
It looked like a lion.
Wonderful.
And nobody about, so we went off back into town.
Yes.
Okay.
But
Later.
it is a moot point for us who was there first.
So
I
we shall
just
never
said-
really know.
So he's
no.
probably the first physically to arrive. I was the first officially to
Right.
arrive, because we arrived at the right time rather than too early.
It's very interesting. You were telling me about the CCG? That
Yeah.
your fathers were both
Mine.
involved.
Mm.
Was yours as well, Victor?
No, he was in the engineers.
Yes, oh, right. Can you just tell us what was that? Because for those of us that don't remember that time, it was a very interesting period in history.
Oh yes, what happened was that in 1945, as soon as we'd taken over Germany, the British government or the Allied governments made the decision that Germany would be ruled by a four-country commission called the Control Commission for Germany.
Right.
And large numbers of, let's say, rather junior, ill-experienced civil servants came out from Britain to take up posts, and actually gave the CCG an extremely bad name, didn't they? Because they were mostly very young and very inexperienced. But also a lot of service people took their demobilisation and took positions in the CCG.
Right.
And as administrators of Germany. And the thought then was that Britain, America, France and Russia were going to rule Germany for 25 years. That was the actual forecast for 25 years.
And in reality, you were saying it was less than 5.
Yes,
It was
after the First World War, there was also a control commission for Germany. It lasted to 1919. And this time they thought, oh no, we can't make that mistake. We can't allow Germany to rearm. We'll stay there for a long time. And
yet the same thing hasn't happened since.
Within 5 years, the CCG had been
what for both of you, what are the things that stick out in your mind? You say about arriving on your first day and popping back into town as well. But what sort of memories do you have of the school itself, the time you were there, as guinea pigs, as you said rightly?
Good time.
The first term. Good time?
It was very interesting, and I thought quite enlightened for its time.
In what way, Victor?
That they were not rigid with class times. During the summer, you had afternoons off for sport, as you did lessons in the evening and prep in the evening.
Oh, right.
And so we were able to avail ourselves of all the facilities that the Navy gave us. The saddle club, about 30 ponies that we could ride. There was a sailing club with 30 or 40 dinghies that we could go on and so on. And so we had all of these facilities, and being co-ed as well, which was very
unusual.
in those days.
Yes. You were fairly well segregated though. Looking at the buildings, were you not?
No.
Oh, we found all sorts of ways of getting desegregated.
In Drake House, the boys lived upstairs and the girls downstairs.
Oh, right.
And in Harrow, the girls lived upstairs and the boys down.
So in the same buildings? I didn't appreciate
Opposite,
that.
yeah. But there was the domestic science labs went from the boys' loo in Drake to the girls' shower in Harrow, and people
as you soon discovered. Right. So that was unusual in those days, wasn't it? For education, boarding school particularly.
Very unusual.
Yeah.
I think some people said it was the first.
Really?
It was certainly the first state co-educational boarding school.
Interesting. What was it like for 2 teenage lads then, at that time?
It was good. It was a great experience. It was a great growing up experience in many ways. I think the other thing that I remember, it was the austerity. It was the winter of 46, 47.
Vicious.
Was that when the sea froze, or one of the occasions the sea froze? That was quite regular, I gather.
It was, because
and the food was desperately short.
Oh, right.
It was very poor food. Latterly it got better. But
and then for more recent pupils, food has figured quite largely in lots of people's memories, but and lots of it. Was that not the case
We
for
had
you?
pulped apricot, remember, every day.
Every day?
Yes, for weeks and weeks, because, the Americans had sent, a shipload of dried apricots or something.
Yeah. Do you still like apricots today?
Yeah.
You do? I'm not phased.
No, it was a very austere time. And I tell you what I noticed. Do you notice the photographs downstairs? Well, the original photographs, they're just the buildings and some grass. The later photographs, there are trees and bushes.
Flowering cherry trees.
Yes, and there was none of that. It was
pretty bleak.
It was a German.
Can you remember what you felt like when you first arrived? And you had to say goodbye to your family and being left in this...
Oh no, it was full of excitement actually, and until, that night, and then you got homesick. But then they kept you fairly active.
So all these sporting activities and things that were available.
There was everything under the sun.
We had our own ship.
Really?
Yeah, that was later, wasn't it?
The photograph downstairs.
Because that was taken up from Hamburg Harbour, wasn't it, by the Navy, and gave it to us, put it in a dry dock, and we scraped it clear of mussels and God knows what. It took a year or two.
But
fabulous.
I think we were quite well taught. I took my high school certificate there. I got into Cambridge, straight through it. And of course we were well taught other things. I was a member of the Saddle Club. I rode, I suppose, 4 or 5 times a week at school till I left school. For 40 years I never got on a horse again. At the age of 57 I got back on a horse. I now ride 2 to 3 times a week.
Good for you.
And my style of riding is exactly as taught at Prince Rupert's School.
It's like riding a bike, you never forget.
Herr Lloyd.
Yes, Herr Lloyd. He was wonderful.
Cavalryman.
German cavalry colonel.
Big stars around the neck and everything.
Gosh.
And he was as strict as strict.
And he was a wonderful teacher. Wonderful teacher.
And I bumped into somebody in Austria who'd been taught by him.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, wonderful. Had you kept in touch with people from your school days?
No.
Not at all?
Not really.
No, it's the usual thing with services people. They just spread.
So have you met some people that you recognise? And
Through with this, I wrote to people.
I
good.
saw Sis, Bernice Griffiths,
Uh-huh.
and I recognised her immediately. She
Really?
hasn't changed one job.
Oh, well,
And then she's been
told
married.
her.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah,
She's
oh,
married
good for you.
42 years. too.
Wonderful. Gosh.
Yeah.
See
So
both of you here. I'm glad you're enjoying it. And
We
thank
are.
you ever so much for giving up this bit of time.
I was in
I
Rodney.
haven't got my binoculars with me.
I went
Just
in-
for a year?
In the first year only. I went in
Mm.
54, left in 55. So
Uh-huh.
I was there when I was 11 or something.
Right. Do you have
Long
any
time ago.
memories? Can you remember much
I
about
don't
it?
remember very much about it, frankly. I remember 2 or 3 people quite clearly from photographs and so on.
Uh-huh.
I met one man here that I remembered.
Oh,
It
good.
was yesterday.
Really?
2 or
Oh,
3
lovely.
people though I remembered, but they wouldn't have remembered if they hadn't
Mhm.
been on this particular occasion.
Mhm.
So I left after 1 year, came over to England to school,
Mhm.
partly because my father was in the Foreign Office, and they changed the rules about paying for the school. And Foreign Office
Ah.
people had to pay the full fees, whereas Army people were subsidised.
Ah.
So my father said, had I stayed, the fees would have been higher than Eton.
Good
So
Lord.
instead of staying, I was brought back to boarding school in England, and where I spent the rest of my education.
Does that tell us something about the education that PRS provided?
I wonder,
It'd
I
be
wonder,
interesting
I wonder.
to hear what other people have to say as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Do you have any memories from that time? I appreciate you were there for such a short time.
I remember,
Anything that stays?
yes, I remember cross-country running and boxing. I did a little
Mm.
bit of boxing, never
Ah,
since,
right.
never before.
Right.
I remember the cold and the seascapes and the wind and the
Did you actually see the
temperature.
frozen sea? You've
Yes,
heard a
I
lot
think
about-
so.
Yeah.
I was in Rodney, and I remember a large, one of the destroyers, HMS Diamond, which moored just outside our windows for a while, which was
Oh, God.
quite a thing.
Quite exciting, yeah.
But otherwise, I don't remember much about
Mm.
classes at all. I remember going to church, to chapel. I think I was confirmed when I was there.
Oh, right.
I remember the Bishop of Fulham, for some reason, seemed to be the man who did all the confirmations.
Had a long
Tell you
trip
what
to come
connection
over.
with Fulham
Yeah.
we had.
Oh, interesting.
My parents visited once or twice with some American friends who were
Mhm.
stationed in the north of Germany.
Oh, right.
But otherwise, I don't remember very much about it.
Very much for coming along this afternoon
Well,
and
it's a
giving up a
pleasure.
bit of your time.
John, could you tell us what your memories of the school are?
Oh, there's many. Like, I remember very well when we arrived. It was September 1947. My main memory is chugging in on the train, and that was the first time when we went in to the school, because the railway line ran right into the school. And my sister Joy had been on the early intake, which was like 6 or 8 weeks in June, July in 1947. And she'd come home from that and told me, where we lived in Munsterlager, all the stories and all the names, and it sounded so exciting. And I can remember, I don't know if my sister will remember this, but I can remember leaning out of the window in the train and hearing the names of the people that she told me about. And it was really very, very, very interesting to see these people. And then, of course, for the next 3 or 4 years, until, because they were older than me, some of those left, I saw them develop, and I suppose developed with them.
You were there for quite a long time compared
Yes.
to some of the pupils.
Yeah, I suppose. I speak for myself. I was there from 47 to 51 in Drake House. I thought that the whole setup in the school was brilliant, and I thought that Smitherman, the headmaster then, I don't know if it was his authority that did it, ran it extremely well, and I felt that the method of having lessons finish at lunchtime in the summer was a brilliant idea, and of course many years ahead of its time.
Yeah.
Because his idea was quite correct. You can't limit a gymkhana, a cricket match, a sailing regatta. So let it run, let everybody enjoy it. And I think that's what really, for me and for many of us, made the school so interesting and, in retrospect, so exciting. The education must have been quite good, because everyone I've met, we've all done well. I don't quite know how you can judge education, because I suspect the standard of education we were given was ahead of its time also. I do suspect that the method of running the school, as I said earlier, well ahead of its time, and I think it appeared to give most of us a specific independence and ability to look after ourselves. And of course, being pitchforked from the boarding school so early.
Yes.
For many people who would never ever, under other circumstances, have had that experience. So moving to a boarding school when you never would have, I think probably opened up many of our lives, and certainly it opened up mine and set me for the rest of my life.
And it was very unusual because it was a girls' boarding school as well as a boys' boarding school. I mean, that was very rare, wasn't it?
Well, again, I call that ahead of its time, and I feel that I don't recall any surprise at the time of having a coeducational boarding school. It goes back to the setting up for later life. I mean, we all had contact with each other in a simple, unpressurized social way. For instance, we all learned to dance properly much earlier than our contemporaries. And when I returned to England in 1951, I found myself in simple social manners far ahead of all those young lads that I'd left behind.
Who went to
ordinary English schools, the boys in one place and the girls in another. And again, I feel that certainly helped set me up, and again I speak specifically for myself, but looking around and chatting to those I've met here today, I feel the same sort of ease of association, which may have come anyway with age, but certainly I feel that it helped launch me into a relaxed, early and more mature late teens and early 20s than otherwise may have been the case. So again, I feel it was ahead of its time.
John Newton, thanks very much for talking to us.
Thanks, it was a pleasure.
You were at the school between 1947 and 51. Can you tell me what your memories of the school were?
Fairly traumatic, as I recall. I'd never been to a boarding school before in my life, and although they'd had a pilot team in there, I believe, opening the school initially, we were the first major intake, so there was quite a lot of adapting that had to be done. I guess with the flexibility of our years, we were able to adapt, but one of the bothering things, if you like, was because the war had so recently ended, we were more or less shut inside this enclosure, and although the staff made tremendous efforts to create a social life within the strictures of the surrounding fence, one did feel a little imprisoned, I think, is probably the phrase.
That's because it was so soon after the war and relations were still a bit tricky at that time.
That's exactly it. I imagine the administration were a bit concerned as to what might happen if we were allowed to go out and mix with the German population, so effectively we weren't allowed to.
So in spite of having a sort of restricted time at the school, you still wanted to come back to the reunion.
Oh, absolutely.
What was the attraction of the reunion for you?
I think probably the fact that it referred to an event that took place so long ago. It's almost 50 years since I first went to Prince Rupert, and that's something I have in common with my contemporaries there. And I've talked to those contemporaries, and they seem to have the same feeling that because the event took place so long ago, they wanted to renew some memories, round out their recollections, and generally perhaps fill in a piece of their life that had gone by so long ago. And I sailed, I rowed. The sailing that I did there grounded me in sailing, which I've continued throughout my life. I've done a lot of deep ocean sailing and stuff like that. And I feel I got the taste for it in Wilhelmshaven. If I hadn't been there, it wouldn't have happened. I was a member of the Sea Cadet Corps there and wound up doing 4 years in the Royal Navy as a result of that. So it had a considerable influence on my life, and I was determined to go back and see what it was about.
That's good.
I personally, and everyone I've spoken to at the reunion, is absolutely overawed at the effort that's been put into organising it, and I don't think any of us can properly express our gratitude to Liz for the effort that she's made to put this thing together. We're all very impressed.
Now, tell me, Mike, when did you first hear about the Wilhelmshaven Association and how?
I got a letter from Liz, I think like most people. which and it had her address on the back, I think with the WHA.
Right.
So I realised immediately that it was something to do with PRS school.
How long ago was that?
November last year.
And I gather you've done a lot of work down under since then.
A little bit.
Yeah.
We've managed to find 8 people in New Zealand.
Brilliant.
Who were PRS pupils, and we've got 2 here. There's Laurie Rouse, who works for Air New Zealand as a senior steward. He's managed to find some air miles to get here.
What a kind chap.
So we both come over, but when we go back, we've got when the video's finished, we're having a reunion of our own in New Zealand, and we're going to try and duplicate some of the fun and the stories that we've heard here.
Because you put some notice up downstairs in the foyer, didn't you? Have you had any people asking you about that?
I haven't been down there.
Yeah.
I spent all my time meeting people and talking to people.
There just aren't enough hours to tell you this.
I'm having trouble. I think by the time 11 o'clock comes,
you might have
I'll try and get down there if I can.
When were you 60 to 62?
60 to 62.
What are the things that stand out in your mind? What memories have you got from those times?
Most of the ones that I would imagine other people have mentioned. I went to 16 schools, and PRS was my 15th school. And when I got to PRS, I in fact stayed 2 years, and that was the longest time I'd ever been at the school. So for many reasons, it was a school that I remember very well, and one that it's the
you
happiest.
You remember fondly? It was
very,
happiest,
yes.
Yeah?
My sister came with me in the same 2 years, and it was the most miserable 2 years she ever had.
Oh, that's sad. You're not supposed to laugh at that.
She didn't like boarding school. She didn't like being away from home. Whereas I got...
She was younger?
She was younger, 2 years younger. And I'd got used to boarding school. It was my second one. I'd been to a co-ed boarding school.
So what was special about PRS? Tell me about it, because I didn't
The people, I mean, flying over here, when I was coming over here from New Zealand, I wondered what I was doing coming here, and my first thought was, would I remember anybody at all?
From 30-odd years ago?
From 33 years ago. I'd been corresponding with Terry Avery, who was on his wish list. But he hadn't sent me a photograph of him, so I in fact had a sort of a 33-year-old image of what Terry looked like from the days when we were 13 and 14. I remembered a lot of people, a lot of faces, but not enough names. And it was when the newsletter started coming that I started to put a few names and faces together. And that's when it started to get exciting, but not knowing how many of them were going to turn up at the reunion was the hardest part. But when I turned up here early today and saw the list, and there were about a dozen people that I thought I would know.
Brilliant.
But I've met about 30.
Gosh.
There's a lot more people that I recognise from faces. I work on remembering people with faces rather than names. So
going back to the question, what made it special, you said it was the people. Why? You went to 16 different schools. Why does this one stand out?
There were closer relationships at this school than I think I ever had in the other ones. I was very happy to move on from most of the other schools. I was there for 6 months or 4 months. This one, at least I had 2 years. I enjoyed the boarding school life. I enjoyed Collingwood Boys, where I was. There was a very strong house spirit.
Right.
From sport, everything. There was a new housemaster there. Fairly seriously into sports, which was the reason I had to leave. My father decided it was time. I had a good social life, good sport life, good sex life, and it was time now to get some education.
Did the academic bit?
That was the last part of
Did you ever forgive him?
Only after I went to my 16th school, but it took a long time. We didn't talk for a long time because he sent me to a school that didn't play soccer, but played... No, please come in. I've been waiting for you. But it played rugby. It didn't play soccer or football, so I found that a little bit hard. So I really did miss leaving. I mean, we joke about how cold it was, but...
Did you see the frozen sea?
The frozen Baltic,
Yeah.
I've got memories of that, many memories.
Crikey.
But the one thing from New Zealand that everybody said is that out of the 8 of us who are there that I've spoken to, only one person has ever talked about PRS to their husband or wife.
Why is that? Strange.
We think it's because we would find it very hard for them to understand what it's like going to a school like PRS, a co-ed boarding school, which is a very unusual sort of concept today even, and living together the way we did and the sort of things that we got up to, not the sort of thing that an average person in New Zealand would understand. So the best part is going to be when we take the video back and get our wives or husbands to actually see and hear, what it was like.
Have some understanding.
They'll have a better understanding.
Why it's so important.
But in the time since we've been contacted by Liz, many of us have had to actually start explaining a few things. Because we were silly enough to pass on the newsletters to our, to my wife, and my children read it, and of course their first question was, you know, what's the brick? And I sort of explained. And
the bottom brick is this?
yeah, and then in the end they would make a list of all their questions, and I'd come home from work and they'd say, Dad, we've got some questions for you. And I'd go, has another newsletter come in? Jane would say, yes, it came this morning and the kids managed to get hold of it. So, you know, it's going to be those sort of questions.
Yeah.
So
Is it nice for you to be able to talk to people about it, though, now?
Yeah. And meeting a lot of people here as well. You know, people that I've actually talked about, actually meeting them here. But
you've got shared memories there. What took you to New Zealand?
How long have we got? No.
Briefly.
I was teaching in London. And the girlfriend that I was going out with, she was sharing a flat with two Kiwis, two New Zealanders, who were over for 2 years. And at the end of their 2 years, they went back and they said that we were going to go back with them, and in the end I decided to have a go. Mainly, somebody said before about the travel, you know, once you start travelling, you keep travelling. So I managed to get away. And
And are you still teaching?
No, I went from teaching to recreation officer. I stayed in physical education and mathematics teaching, recreation officer, and I now work for Special Olympics, which is working with mentally handicapped people of all ages. It's an international sports program.
Oh, right.
And I work in the Asia-Pacific region, and I have 18 countries to look after.
Gosh.
So my time is now spent travelling around Asia-Pacific, working with people who are working with.
What sort of things do you do? Do you organise?
I do the training. No, I do the training. I work with their national committees, and I train up their coaches, their volunteers, their national committees, and I work with government officials as well in an educational way, teaching them what Special Olympics is all about.
So how different is it working with mentally handicapped athletes?
The only difference is the level you work at, the speed you work at. You cover the same work, but in a different sort of way, and you have to have an understanding of how they learn at a much slower rate.
And what are the
But it's a lot
rewards
more,
for you?
lot more rewarding.
In what way?
Well, they don't talk back, they don't argue, you don't have as many discipline problems. Are there any teachers listening? They'll understand. Having been a teacher, no, it's a much more rewarding because they appreciate what you're doing for them far more than an average student would. They give you a lot more back, and you can see it's a much slower, all the way through.
From children, or is it adults, young adults?
It's the full range. They start at 6, they start competing around 8 in full training, and the oldest person that we have in New Zealand is around 73, so it's a full age range. But the sports are age appropriate, so we don't have 83-year-olds or 73-year-olds doing springboard diving.
And stuff,
They do it, they play bowls, bowls or croquet, that sort of level.
Is it every 4 years the Olympics are held, like the
World Games, which is the Special Olympics, is every 4 years, but in each country they have national games every year or 2 years, and then there are regional games, local games, so there's a full strata of competition.
Talking about a lot of people involvement.
Around the world there are around 4 million athletes in 143 countries at the moment. It's a very...
And growing, by the sounds of what you're saying.
And growing very, very quickly.
Yeah, wonderful.
You have a very strong programme here in the UK.
When I was living in Cardiff, there were some Special Olympics being held while I was down there,
And we're off. The World Games is in New Haven, Connecticut, on July the 1st to the 9th in America. And I was very grateful for Liz for organising this weekend for the PRS so that I could go to the World Games. Otherwise, we would have to have moved the World Games.
And that's what PRS means.
Oh, yes.
Thank you very much, Mike.
It's a pleasure.
Fascinating. Thank you. Thanks for spending some time to come and help us make this video. And you were head girl.
I was head girl, yes.
1967 to 69,
I was
you were
head girl
there.
in 1968.
68, right, for your middle year of the two, the middle portion. Yeah. What are your memories of Prince Rupert School?
Well, Prince Rupert School was the 7th school I'd been to, and like many forces children, I'd been uprooted, it was a year here, 18 months there. And before I went to Prince Rupert School, I'd been 5 years at a girls' grammar school in England, and I really thought this time we were staying. And it was a bit of a shock to me when my father said, we're off again, we're going to Germany, you'll have to go to boarding school. And I was really not very happy about it at all.
Had you been to a boarding school before?
No, I'd always been to a day school before. So the idea that it was a boarding school and I wouldn't be able to live at home was really a shock to me. And what I remember first of all about going there was how bleak it was. It was bloody cold, and it was very... It was institutional.
It looks grim to the uninitiated.
Yes, it was pretty bleak up there on the North Sea coast.
What time of year did you arrive?
Well, I arrived in September, but even so, this sort of... It wasn't like home because there were no carpets on the floor, there was no wallpaper, the curtains were drab, the beds were metal, the bathrooms were institutional, and it looked like an institution, which is what it was, of course.
Of course, yes.
But no home comforts at all.
So the fact it was a boarding, how old were you at that time?
I was 16, just coming on 17, so I was there for my
Right.
sixth form years.
Right. That was your first impressions, and
Yes.
the not wanting,
Yes.
well, it's a bit of a shock, a
Yes.
hell of a shock, I should think, yes.
Yes.
What sort of things stand out in your memory about the time that you were there, apart from the cold?
The cold stands out most of all, I have to say.
Uh-huh.
One thing I remember is it's snowing in October and not seeing the ground again till Easter because it was covered in snow. It was really pretty bleak. So the cold is one thing I remember. But I wasn't happy there, I have to say. It's been a day of varying memories for me because I didn't want to be away from home. And
Were you very homesick?
I was very homesick, even though home was somewhere my parents had only been for a few months because
Sure.
they were just in Hanover. They just arrived at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't eat, and my weight really dropped very dramatically. And in the end I had to go back to Hanover and spend 2 weeks in hospital because they thought that there was something wrong with me. Now I think it would be diagnosed as anorexia.
Right, yes.
But it was a pretty grim time, and eventually I realised that I had to go back because there wasn't an alternative. My parents were living in Hanover. There wasn't a day school, a day secondary school in Hanover, no. So it's either boarding school in Wilhelmshaven or back in England. And
even further away?
Even further away, yes.
Do you have any brothers and sisters? Or
Yes, I've got a younger brother. He's here today as well.
Oh, right.
And I think eventually I learned to cope. And then after about 6 months I discovered boys. And that was when things really started to look up. Yes. Because I kept a diary for some of my time at Wilhelmshaven, and the first bits are full of, oh God, it's horrible, I want to go home. And then it was suddenly, oh, so-and-so fancies so-and-so, and so-and-so's going out with so-and-so.
Interest change.
Yes, and oh, we're going to the sixth form club. I went to the cinema with so-and-so. I better not mention any names, just in case they're watching.
I'm sure they'd love you to mention them. Very flattered.
And that is when my life really changed, I have to say. Yes, I think it's really perked up towards the end of my time there.
So you have happier memories for
Happier
the latter,
memories, yes.
latter time.
But of course it was the late 60s, and it was the time of, you know, increasing freedom, flower power, psychedelia, a real explosion in popular music. And I did not want to be at a boarding school in the north of Germany. I wanted to be in London, which is where it's all happening.
Yes, of course.
And one of the things I really remember is always being told off for my clothes being too outre.
Oh,
As
really?
Mrs. Bishop, the senior mistress, said, much too outre, much too loud. Oh God, you're wearing
Too short?
beads. Too short.
Too short.
Everybody remembers too short.
Of course, yes.
No more than 2 inches above the knee when kneeling, yes. But yes, constantly being told off about my clothes. And Mrs. Bishop was very strict on skirt lengths and makeup.
Right. I don't think Ray and Daphne Dyer were talking a little bit about the fairly strict rules about could a boy kiss a girl after cinema. Were you involved in that sort of?
Yes.
Can you remember some of the sort of sillier rules, or that might seem silly to people, youngsters
that
now?
Particular one. If you were a couple, you could sit in the back 2 rows at cinema, and then the boy could put his arm around the girl, or indeed vice versa. But the teacher sat behind you at the very back of the cinema and tried to make sure there wasn't too much snogging going on.
Right.
And then there was this brief interlude where you went to get your coat after cinema, and a little bit of kissing could take place in the cloakroom. And then it was boys back on the bus and back to the dike. And But the rules, I remember, are just the petty things, I suppose, for controlling children in a foreign country. Like having to sign out before you went to visit a friend in another house in the evening. And you could only go into town at certain times, and then you had to be in uniform, unless, I think, not when you were in the sixth form. So you couldn't sort of walk around Wilhelmshaven freely. It was specified times and days.
What sort of things did you do in Wilhelmshaven when you went out? Or shouldn't I ask?
One thing I remember very clearly is going to see Dr. Zhivago in German, which I couldn't understand a word of because I didn't understand German.
But the music was nice.
Most of the time we went to the record shop and tried to persuade the guy to put on records for us and listen to them, and hardly ever bought them, I have to say.
Could you get British records? I mean, it was the sort of big boom time for
British and American music was, really taking over the world at that time,
yeah.
so it's perfectly easy to get, the Beatles and stuff like that, the flower power stuff in Wilhelmshaven.
So were there little booths that you went to?
With headphones on, yes. Spent ages on Saturday listening to records, yes.
Did you have, I've seen people's pocket money, bank books and that sort of thing. Did you have sort of money dished out to you on a weekly basis?
Yes, I think we were given on a weekly basis. I think pocket money had to be paid to the staff, and then it was dished out to us, yes.
Right.
Yeah.
So what could you spend your money on if you didn't buy too many records?
Makeup.
Right.
Makeup we spent it on, and tights. Yes, there wasn't much to spend money on, to be honest. So I don't really remember much about the pocket money side. So.
What about your duties as head girl? What did that involve?
I think I was supposed to set an example.
Oh, right. You obviously did.
Mostly I remember constantly telling off younger children, you know, I feel horrible about it now, for running down the corridors.
Oh, right.
And for talking when they shouldn't, and for having their skirts too short, the very thing I wanted to do.
You were one of the police
myself.
in that way, weren't
yes,
you? Yeah.
and having to take prep and so on.
Uh-huh.
I think I wasn't a very exemplary head girl, because after a certain period, Mrs. Bishop, who was the senior mistress, decided that this really wasn't good enough, and she appointed a co-head girl with me.
Oh, really?
Because I wasn't up to scratch, but she couldn't really sack me. So I think I was too outre to be a head girl.
So you were joint?
I was joint
you shared
head
the
girl.
title
Yes,
with, yes.
I was joint head girl.
Is
yeah.
Bishop here today?
I don't know.
You haven't seen her, have you?
I've been avoiding her if she is. Several people I was in the sixth form with, and some of the staff as well, of course.
Yes,
and,
of course.
And I keep calling them Miss So-and-so, Mr. So-and-so. They don't be daft, but of course one never knew their first name.
Of course, yes.
And it seems really strange to call them by their first
So
name.
you're glad you stayed?
Yes, I'm hearing the music is going to be a bit strange as well, because music was very important at that time. As I said
Absolutely,
before,
yes.
it really was a major cultural force. And the end-of-term dances to somebody like me in my late teens were really important as well, for, you know, getting near the boys.
Thank you very much, James. It's been lovely talking to you. Thank you for being so honest as well. Very interesting. Thanks.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
saw the pupils off on the last train, it was a sad occasion for all of us. And there were lots of tears and lots of regrets. And as they were loading up, one small boy who came from Mountbatten House, a house which I had a particular affection for, having served it for several years, ran past me, and as he ran past, he had a lot of things sort of balanced on the top of his case, and his football boots fell off and something. He said, "Sod it!" And immediately, because I'm a teacher, I said, "What did you say?" He said, "Sorry." And I said, "Sorry." And I was.
Once upon a time, there was Prince Rupert School. But before we go back there, let's take a dike walk. Look, the Kaiser Wilhelm Bridge is still there. More or less unchanged, but Strand has altered a lot. It's an elegant promenade now, or you can enjoy a drink or a coffee in the sun, although we haven't had much of that this year. You can take a trip round the harbour these days, which you used not to be able to. The aquarium. It's been entirely rebuilt. But we'd have to go to the mess for that. You can still go up the tower for a bird's eye view of Wilhelmshaven. Or better still, let's take a plane. There's still a lot of water in and around Wilhelmshaven. The boys' houses and sickbay have been joined by some very exclusive blocks of flats on the Fliegerdijk. Shackleton, Lawson and Frobisher are now used by the German Navy. Over the Golden Dam to the main school. There's been a lot of discussion about opening the dam over the years, but it's still there. The barrier is always raised these days at the guardhouse, and there's no longer a post office in the admin building. The first thing the German Navy did was to remove the fire escapes that it had taken the British Army 24 years to put up. There are no sixth form dances or drama club plays in the hall these days. The main site is now a German military school for people returning to civilian life after their time in the forces. I wonder if the food is as good, or as bad, in Nelson as it used to be. A budding Virginia Wade, perhaps? Stratton Stadium. I wonder how many points Mr. Meredith made. Is the headmaster at home? Of boarding school life. It wasn't all bad, was it? German is spoken in Mozartstraße now. The houses haven't changed much, but you can't park your car on the path anymore. Town walk to spend pocket money in Karstadt or Markstraße. The Wilhelmshaveners still ask me today why pupils had to wear their uniform in town. Wilhelmshaven has changed a lot in the last 23 years since the school left, and is still changing, but some views have remained the same. Farewell to Wilhelmshaven. Officially and finally. The sun sets over Prince Rupert School, Wilhelmshaven. These were a few impressions of Wilhelmshaven today. Why don't you come and see for yourself?
At the school. Could you tell me how the main things you remember about the school?
Well, the main things I remember about the school was actually after they'd been there 3 weeks, my parents coming to visit, and up until then it seemed okay, and then when they drove away I had a lump in my throat and felt homesick, but after that everything seemed okay. The main things that I remember was the camaraderie, everything that we did for the house, room points, which were, when you first started at the school, you were taught how to make a bed by the matron, and all the duties that you had to do before you went to school. And then the matron would come in your absence and check the rooms, and we all used to rush home at lunchtime to see if we were in the running for the cup at the end of the year for the best kept room. And if room points weren't 10, then we would all shoot down to the room to find out whose bed had been thrown out into the corridor or out of the window by the matron, and promptly debag him. I remember at night someone taught us to make diode radios, which we used to have old XWD headphones and make these radios in matchboxes and listen in the dark to AFM. If you were clever and you could fit a tuning condenser to them, then you could pick up BFN and Radio Luxembourg. And those were things that we did. I also remember Sunday morning after church, being allowed to go to the girls' house for dances for a couple of hours before lunch on Sunday. And I also remember that the only record they ever had was Rubber Ball by Johnny V. Bobby V, sorry. And a couple of Connie Francis records. Those are the things that I remember.
Being a mixed boarding school, particularly in those days, was very unusual. Do you think that was a good thing, or did it hold people back and make them inhibited?
No, I think it was a good thing. We saw very little of the girls most of the time because the girls' houses were based in the main school, the senior houses, and the boys were out of the main area at various locations around the giant lake. We did have a girls' school in between ours and Collingwood on one side, and that was Frobisher, and they were very junior girls. And the only time we saw the girls was actually during occasional school hours and for social events. So basically, I think it was very rare that you actually did see the girls.
Yeah.
Obviously, there were courtships and romances that developed from that. And everyone used to wear something called a crush pin, which was a little pin with a coloured head on it, donating the house colour that your girlfriend was in or who you had a crush on.
And when you heard about this reunion, did you feel instantly that you wanted to come along to it, or did you think, was your first reaction, you don't really know, and then you made your mind up later?
My reaction was immediate. As soon as I read in my local paper that there was a Williamshaven Association and contacting old school friends, then I immediately rang Liz in Southampton from my home in Yorkshire. I couldn't believe it. I spoke to her within minutes of reading the article and then penned a letter which she subsequently published in one of the newsletters. There was never any doubt that I was not going to come to this event, and in saying that I've bought the sweatshirt and I will be there in '97, believe me.
Everyone is really enjoying it. I mean, they're glad to be here, they're really enjoying it. Why do you think that is, that they want to meet people that they were at school with 20, 30 and 40 years ago?
Well, in my case, 34 years ago. Well, there was tremendous camaraderie at the school, particularly in the houses. Any sport that we did, anything that we did, we had to do all for the house.
It's very character building.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
But because of it took children away from their homes at such a young age, it seems that they travel all over the world. They're restless as well.
Well, that's right, that's right. I mean, they always say about forces children that you've never really got many belongings, because and some of the people are quite surprised that I've met that I've still got a skull cap, a scarf and a skull blazer badge and a tie and some copies of the Cavalier. but those are things that I've managed to hold on to and I value very dearly. And I brought my wife with me today because my wife has heard so much about the school over the years, just little snippets, that I felt that she should be here, even though she feels a little bit out of it. I felt that she should be here to see how people feel about the school. And I think in listening to the speeches, and especially the invitation by the Mayor of Williamshaven, the applause said it all. That's how we feel. It's been a very emotional day for me, meeting people who I roomed with for many years, who I did athletics with, and carried the banner for the house with for nearly 3 years. And I don't ever want to lose that friendship and their addresses, never. I really, for most of the day, I've had a lump in my throat.
A school with an unusual combination of good standards, and all the pupils remember it very well. Norman King, thanks very much for talking to us.
My pleasure. Hello, I'm John Newton, and we're at Newbury Racecourse for the PRS reunion, and I'm here to ask Liz a few questions. So, this of course is Liz, and Liz, it's a terrific day. Now, I'm not sure if you realise how much history you brought together today. Now, you've done it, but how did you start it all off?
How did I start it in terms of the work, or what motivated me to start it?
How did it start?
It started with me trying to find my friend Jackie Clifford and a couple of other people, particularly Alison Johnson and a couple of other girls that I was particularly interested in. I placed an advert on the Channel 4 teletext service, and as a result of that I had a couple of people phoning me up who were really excited. I had lots of people phone, but 2 people in particular phoned me and said, look, I know you're not looking for me, but I went to the school, I've never spoken to anyone who went there, I loved it, I'd like to find my friends, I've often wondered what happened to them, you know, what did you like about the school? They were so excited. And I thought to myself, well, okay, let's just give it a whirl and try and find out how easy it is to find people. So I found out some very cheap newspapers for advertising points of view in garrison towns, Colchester, Aldershot, near Catterick, Salisbury, these type of towns. Placed personal ads, just short ads, starting with the word Wilhelmshaven to catch their eye, and I always had a trawl of 2 or 3 people who phoned up and said, what's this all about? What's going on?
So you built up a list?
Built up a list, and just then had a few pieces of luck. Found a teacher who, I think was Mr. Swainston, who's not here today, gave me a list of 100 or so ex-members of staff.
Then it snowballed?
Then it snowballed.
Because the people you found
That's
people
right.
for you.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, it's June 1995 now, of course.
Mm-hmm.
When did you start this?
Officially, the association was formed on the 1st of January.
Now, when did you actually start your action of finding people?
November 93.
So it's been approaching 2 years.
Yeah, getting on for that.
Yeah, of increasing hard work.
Yes. That's the only way I can answer that.
And organising.
Yeah.
And have you had help in the organising, or have you done it all yourself?
All the organisation, the logistics are all down to me. I don't do very much research anymore. Research, which takes, in some ways, a lot more time, is done by Hilary Caswell and Pat Woods.
And they, of course, work with you, but you have a day job as well.
Yeah.
And you do this in the evening.
And weekends.
And the weekends. It's an amazing day you've organised, and you've seen how happy everyone is to be here and to see each other. But the last 4 weeks and days, the last few weeks and days to this actual event, it must have been really so much for you.
In terms of work?
In terms of everything, tell me.
Yes, the main problem, and this sounds like, I mean, I tried to pace myself because I wanted to achieve certain things by certain dates, particularly with memorabilia, because that takes such a long time to catalogue and put together, and I wanted to have everything ready just to mount on the boards, because you haven't got a lot of time to fiddle around. But every time I went to do something, the phone rang. So the constant phone ringing the last 4 weeks is the thing that I remember most of all. Roger, because he's deaf, he says, well, it's wonderful because I never heard, the reason I can support Liz is because I never hear the phone ringing. So all I can remember really about the last 4 weeks, and this is absolute truth, is the phone ringing non-stop.
I mean, here we are today, coming towards the end of an enormously well-organised operation, and you're remembering only the telephone. There must have been more than that.
Well, no, because in fact, everything was in place well in advance of the 4 weeks. The 4 week is the detail period, and that was just things like memorabilia. The venue I'd sorted out a long time ago. Who was going to help out on the day, I'd sussed that out some time ago. And coming up to the 4 weeks, you know, it is just really the detail.
Do we know now how many people have actually attended?
Not yet, but I would estimate we've probably had about 25 no-shows, which would mean the number of arrivals probably 725.
725, and the majority of those ex-pupils.
We had, I believe, 43 members of staff purchase tickets. Whether they all arrived, I don't know.
But imagine what you've done. You've brought together approaching 800 ex-pupils at a school over a 20-year period that started almost 50 years ago.
I know, it's amazing.
It's a most amazing.
I feel like that too. But what is so staggering is that only, I would say about 2 or 3 weeks ago, did the scale of it really hit me. And it was one night I was just about to drop off to sleep, and it just dawned on me, and I think it's because I just had a fax from Australia. We've just located a new person, and they wanted to come to the reunion, and it was panic stations. And I lay there just sort of thinking, how much am I going to do? And I realised then just the scale of it. Because when you're focused and you're doing things and concentrating on detail, sometimes you don't always see the wider issues. And yes, I am now aware of the scale of it, but perhaps it was a good job that it only really dawned on me, you know, a couple of weeks ago.
It's been work, but no doubt also a hobby. But the hobby is finished for a moment in the sense of the pressure upon you. So what are you going to do now to fill the same time?
I don't believe the pressure is on, because with the upcoming visit to Wilhelmshaven, I believe that we've got to, because I know that the people from Wilhelmshaven are going to really put as much as they can into this organisation.
This is the two officials?
This is the two officials who are here. We're going to have the return trip as our golden reunion, if you like, you know, the Jubilee, Golden Jubilee and the start of the school. And I know that they will put a lot into it, so I want to get as many people as possible to Wilhelmshaven. Now, we found 1,700 out of 7,000 people. So in the next 2 years, our drive now is going to be to find as many of the missing lot as we can, so we get a good turnout in Wilhelmshaven.
Liz, we all have a great deal to thank you for. Thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you very much. Everything I've put into it, I've had back time and time over, I promise you.
chance, we got to know about the foundation of the Wilhelmshaven Association and of this meeting. At once, we got into contact with Liz Bird, as we thought it could be an idea meeting once in Wilhelmshaven, the town which has not forgotten Prince Rupert's School, and especially all of you. We are really impressed about the work which had to be done to prepare this reunion. Congratulations, Liz, to you and your helpers for this initiative. PRS is unforgotten in Wilhelmshaven. And now I read the message of our mayor and our chief executive. Ladies and gentlemen, a lot of Wilhelmshaven citizens remember those days when teachers and students from Prince Rupert's School left their mark on our city's life. We have pleasant memories on that time, memories which are still existing today. It is with great pleasure that we got to know about the foundation of the Wilhelmshaven Association, made up of former teachers and students of Prince Rupert's School. This way, we would like to invite you to come to Wilhelmshaven in 1997, featuring the Golden Jubilee of PRS, and to come to that town which was part of your life. We would be very glad if you were able to organize a meeting in the town at the North Sea. On the part of Wilhelmshaven, we will do our best to support you in your organization. Yours faithfully, Eva Menzel, Mayor, Arno Schreiber, Chief Executive.
As well, because it's good. Come on down for all that time. Oh, it's bedlam out there tonight, isn't it? Are we ready? I think we are ready, so we'd like to wish you all a very good night, a very happy journey. We hope you'll be back here next year or whenever the next meeting is.
personal view is that anyone that's been to the school is probably still living by the standards that were set and have probably passed those standards on to the children. I'm sure that the experiences that I had at the school in terms of character building has put me in good stead for the rest of my life.
So, Norman King, thanks very much for talking to us.
My pleasure.
We will sit there and then we'll send it.